Hi there, we're live at the RSA conference in San Francisco. I'm Bradley Barth, Director of Community Content with the Cyber Risk Alliance. My guest today is Jeetu Patel. He is the Executive Vice President and General Manager of Security and Collaboration at Cisco. Jeetu, thanks for being here.
Bradley, thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about resilience and the role that having a secure cloud architecture or multi cloud architecture plays in resilience. So, I think the best place to start is let's actually get a little bit of a definition of resilience, because that's one of those words that you hear bandied about all the time.
It gets overused quite a bit, right? But if you,
Overused.
yeah,
The definition is very nebulous. It's very open to interpretation. How do you define it? And why is cloud such an important have such an important role to play in resilience?
so if you think about what's happened over the course of the past couple of years, we have all kind of witnessed how companies need to be much more resilient with the externalities that are going on. So you have to be more business resilient, you have to be more operationally resilient, you have to be more supply chain resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that it's equally important that we are security resilient as well, which means that if you do have a breach, how do you make sure that you can recover from that breach and respond to that as quickly as possible? It doesn't bring your company down. you
Yeah.
know. And that's a pretty important, kind of dimension to keep in mind, because security is now a critical infrastructure component. And as you know, even in the course of the past few years, there's been a tremendous amount of expansion of the threat vectors where people can go out and attack your entire supply chain can go down if there's a breach. There's your critical infrastructure, your power grid, your water system, your financial system, your healthcare system could go down. And so we believe that organizations have to be resilient from a security standpoint, just like they need to be from a business standpoint. And of course, cloud technologies are going to have a pretty profound effect on it, because more and more of your applications are moving to the cloud. People are working in more of a hybrid mixed mode kind of world, and they're going to work. They're going to be working from any device, whether it's managed or unmanaged, any application, whether it's sanctioned or unsanctioned. And organizations have to figure out a way that they can stay resilient in spite of all of this, as they have more and more threat vectors and threat actors getting more sophisticated.
You had a lot of interesting points, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of directions I can go. But I think the first thing I'd like to ask you to follow up is just the idea of that ecosystems are getting so complex for organizations, and so when there is a breach, as you said, or some kind of an incident, an exploit or whatever, even if it just seems like at first it's one device or one user, it's never that simple. Attacks don't happen in a
Yeah.
vacuum. And so there's always a ripple effect, and it can go up and down the supply chain. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're having this discussion about resilience.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we used to be, when this industry started, I mean, it was largely around organizations protecting themselves around a perimeter. And now what you're starting to see is there's a tremendous amount of interconnectedness. There's a hyper level of interconnectedness among all of the different companies that are out there. So I'll give you an example. An auto manufacturer recently had to stop the production line because one of the component manufacturers had a potential breach. And the ripple effect is pretty profound when the weakest link in the supply chain can actually have the entirety of the supply chain go down, or a demand chain go down. And the way that we think about this is there's this kind of very interesting construct of a security poverty line. And what is a security poverty line? It's line below which organizations are not able to, either financially or through resources or through influence, protect themselves the way that the other organizations who have more resources to protect themselves. But the reality is if you happen to be in contact with another organization that's below the security poverty line, you're just as exposed.
Mhm.
And that's a pretty important construct to keep in mind on how do you keep just not your organization, but your entire supply chain and your ecosystem, protected from bad actors.
Sure. I mean, is there anything philosophically or strategy-wise that organizations can do to make sure that they, and for that matter, their partners throughout their extended ecosystem, get over that poverty line?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we are talking about at this conference is, it's you can't be overly kind of self-centered on this entire kind of initiative where you have to think about the ecosystem as a whole, and the way in which you as an organization and you as a vendor community need to think about this is, look, in some ways, this is a hyper-competitive world. And if you think about the vendor landscape, all the vendors like us, we are very aggressively competing with one another. Competition is good because it creates more innovation. All those things are great. But the reality is the enemy is not the competitor. The enemy is the bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
And we ought to make sure that as we're thinking about this, that what are we doing to protect this society from bad actors so that you don't have critical infrastructure breakdown that's occurring. And we've seen a lot of these happen over the course of the past few years. And the implications are pretty profound. And so what can organizations do to not just protect themselves, but make sure that they think about the entirety of the demand chain and the supply chain and protect that entirety of companies and ensure that that data is being exchanged and shared, from a threat intelligence standpoint with the core ecosystem. It's going to be pretty important.
Let's stay on the track of talking a little bit about resilience, and we defined it a little bit, but also another question that I think a lot of organizations are always asking is how do you measure it? How do you benchmark it?
Yeah.
And that's something that can be up for debate. But what's your take on that?
The easiest measure of resilience is when you do have a breach, how quickly can you detect that something went wrong? How quickly can you respond to it? And how quickly can you take remediation actions for it? And so the way that the security industry is broken up is there's two major sets of problems that need to get solved. One of them is around prevention. What do you need to do to protect your organization from a breach actually occurring? Whether it be on any of the control points, whether it be the user, the device, the network, the application, how do you protect yourself? And the second area is if there is a breach that happens, because security is all about minimization of risk. It's not about going out and making sure that you eliminate risk completely. So when there is a breach that does occur, what can you do to make sure that you've got the right level of threat intelligence practices in place so that you can detect a breach fast enough, almost in real time? Make sure that you have the right level of machine learning so that the vulnerabilities can get managed and you can be proactive on managing those, and then respond and remediate as fast as possible.
And can you give also you had mentioned that there were some recent examples of what would be key lessons learned for the industry in terms of where we either saw exemplary examples of resilience, and in other cases where you can still get a sense that there's still some work left to be done. What stands out in your mind as some of the key examples from the past year or so?
Look, I think an example of where these things have kind of gone sideways is when your production line gets impacted for an unnatural amount of time, or your business continuity is impacted because of a breach in security. And those are happening on a daily basis across multitude of different industries. And the absence of that, when you can actually proactively know, like one of the great things that is starting to happen because of machine learning technology now is security is a data game. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is the more scale that you have and the more telemetry you have, you can better predict a breach before it actually happens, right? And a great example of this is vulnerability management. This is a fascinating statistic. Most organizations can only patch about 20% of the vulnerabilities that they themselves have identified. Only 20%, mm-hmm. which means that 80% of the vulnerabilities go unaddressed because they just don't have the resources and the time to go out and do it, because there's way too much signal to noise ratio mm-hmm. that's coming in as well. So what do you do about that? Well, identifying a risk-based model that tells you there's going to be a higher level of risk with a certain set of vulnerabilities. And so go patch those first before you patch the others, because there's actually real-time data on which exploits are actually, occurring right now. Those are actually meaningful advancements that you can make in this industry. And that's happening because there's the right level of data and the right level of machine learning models that you can actually create an inference of what's happening. Yeah. And so what you'll start to see is a tremendous amount of innovation made with artificial intelligence and machine learning, with the data and telemetry, especially as the web goes dark. As you have end-to-end encryption, you might not be able to look inside a packet that's traversing a network, but you'll actually look and create an inference saying, These are anomalous sets of behavior. And so what do we need to do to go out and protect that? And the same will happen on a device posture. How do you go out and manage your device posture in the right way?
You had also mentioned business continuity, which very much goes hand in hand with resilience.
Yep.
And we see how critical something like the concept of business continuity is, just even off of examples of some of the major ransomware attacks that have happened over the last couple of years. I would be curious to ask you, where do you find that organizations are most falling short in terms of business continuity? Is there a particular area where things really need to be shored up even more?
Yeah, so I think, firstly, if you look at the phishing and malware and ransomware attacks, they're growing in double and triple digit percentages, right? And what's happened is, at large, organizations are very, very resource constrained, not just from a capital perspective, but also from the quality of talent that you need as an organization to go out and protect against the breaches. While that's happening, the threat surface has expanded, and this quality of threat actors has gone from just hackers in basements to nation states, right? And so you've got this kind of dual effect: is you've got a huge shortage of skilled talent and labor, and you've got a huge amount of upsurge of the kind of people that you might have that are going out and doing the attacks, who are far more sophisticated than what they need to be. And if you don't have the right investments on both the prevention as well as the detection and response side of the house, you will fall short as an organization. And so the way that we think about this is, what do we need to do to ensure that organizations are well prepared and given the right level of data of what might actually end up happening, rather than just telling them after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And real time and the speed with which you can go out and respond and remediate a threat is actually just as important as detecting a threat in the first place.
As organizations are trying to develop a more secure cloud architecture for themselves, they're going to have to consider all the challenges that are associated with the expanding attack surface that you had just mentioned
Absolutely.
before. And that's, of course, you think about the just all of the factors that have complicated things over the last couple of years that are only getting more complicated, remote and hybrid workforces, distributed work environments, and a proliferation of all sorts of different devices that have to be accounted for, different devices, different endpoints. So do you have any recommendations in terms of, where do you even start to begin when you're trying to formulate, how am I going to create some kind of a secure multi-cloud architecture for myself that accounts for all of these complications?
Well, the way that we think about this is the future of work is definitively going to be hybrid. People are going to work in mixed mode. Sometimes they're going to work in the office. Sometimes they're going to work at home. Sometimes somewhere in the middle. And when they're working in these different areas, they're going to work from devices that are managed or unmanaged, applications that are sanctioned or unsanctioned, networks that are secure or insecure. And when that is happening, how can you make sure that you provide some easy mechanism for organizations so that the complexity is taken away, the friction is low, both on the management side as well as the end user using it, while still protecting them and the efficacy being high, right? And so this is a huge area of investment for us. In fact, one of the things that we're announcing right now is this initiative that we've been working on for many years, called the Security Cloud. And basically, it's a combination of connectivity technology, security capabilities, as well as the threat intelligence side of the house. And how can you have those services be brought together so that regardless of who an organization is and whether they want to go out and connect to a private application, a public application, or directly to the internet, we can make sure that as long as they're connecting through the security cloud, they're safe and secure. And so that's an area that we've actually spent a fair amount of time in. And in fact, what we see happening right now is majority of these kind of major investments that you see happening in the future will be around this notion of, can you provide the right level of threat intelligence? Can you provide the right level of prevention and do it in the cloud? Because this notion of a perimeter is going away. There is no such thing as just protecting your organization with a perimeter. You now have the perimeter is the cloud, and you need to make sure that you can actually protect your data and your applications and your devices all in the cloud. And you can't just do one of those pieces. You have to make sure that you're doing the entirety of it all. So the user, device, network, and applications, all four have to get secured.
Well, great. Well, with that, it looks like we've just about run out of time. So I want to once again thank my guest, Jeetu Patel from Cisco, for joining us today and having a very great and interesting conversation on resilience in the cloud with me. Thank you so
Hey, thank you for
much.
having me.
Just a reminder also to check out the landing page at securityweekly.com/Cisco. You can find more information there. With that, this is Bradley Barth from the Cyber Risk Alliance, and we will see you a little bit later. Keep watching.